and welcome back to our deep dive into World War II. Today, we're shifting our focus to the other side of the globe, to the vast battlegrounds of Asia and the Pacific. This isn't just a side story. It's a crucial theater of war that ultimately pulled the world's largest industrial power into the conflict, changing everything. So, how did this all begin? We need to rewind to the 1930s. Japan, a rising imperial power, had grand ambitions. They saw Asia as their rightful sphere of influence, a source of resources to fuel their empire. This ambition turned into aggressive action in 1931 when they invaded Manchuria in northeast China. This was just the beginning. By 1937, Japan launched a full-scale invasion of China, a brutal conflict that would rage for 8 long years. This war saw horrific events like the Nanjing Massacre, a tragedy that still casts a long shadow today. But China did not simply collapse. Under a fragile alliance between the nationalists, or Kuomintang, and the communists, the Chinese people fought back with incredible determination. They waged a fierce, prolonged resistance, bogging down hundreds of thousands of elite Japanese troops in a massive continental quagmire. This resistance was vital. It didn't just fight for China's survival, it prevented Japan from deploying its full military might elsewhere. China became a massive sinkhole for Japanese resources and manpower, a critical factor often overlooked in Western accounts of the war. With its war in China dragging on and becoming increasingly costly, Japan's leaders grew desperate for resources, especially oil. Their eyes turned southward, towards the resource-rich European colonies in Southeast Asia, like French Indochina, the Dutch East Indies, and British Malaya. This southern expansion policy, however, put Japan on a direct collision course with another major power in the Pacific, the United States. The U.S., along with Britain and the Netherlands, saw Japan's aggression as a threat to their own interests and to the stability of the region. In response, they imposed crippling economic sanctions. The most devastating of these was a total oil embargo in the summer of 1941. For Japan, a nation that imported over 80% of its oil, this was an economic death sentence. Their war machine would grind to a halt in months. The leadership in Tokyo was faced with a stark choice: either abandon their imperial ambitions and withdraw from China, or go to war to seize the oil fields of Southeast Asia. They chose war, but there was a massive obstacle standing in their way: the U.S. Pacific Fleet, stationed at Pearl Harbor in Hawaii. Japanese military planners believed that to successfully conquer Southeast Asia, they had to deliver a knockout blow to this fleet, bind them precious time to consolidate their new empire before America could recover and fight back. So, a highly secret, incredibly audacious plan was set in motion. A massive carrier strike force steamed across the Pacific in total radio silence, preparing for a surprise attack that would, they hoped, shatter American naval power and morale in a single stroke. On the morning of December 7, 1941, a date which will live in infamy, the attack came. Japanese planes swarmed the skies over Pearl Harbor, dropping bombs and torpedoes on the unsuspecting American fleet anchored below. The devastation was immense. In less than 2 hours, several battleships were sunk or crippled. Hundreds of aircraft were destroyed on the ground, and over 2,400 Americans lost their lives. From a tactical perspective, it was a stunning success for Japan. But it was a strategic catastrophe. By a sheer stroke of luck, the 3 most important ships in the Pacific Fleet, the aircraft carriers, were out at sea on maneuvers and escaped the attack completely. These carriers would soon become the backbone of the American counterattack. More importantly, the sneak attack on Pearl Harbor did not break the American spirit. It enraged it. It unified a previously divided American public, instantly erasing the powerful isolationist sentiment that had kept the U.S. out of the war. The day after the attack, President Franklin D. Roosevelt asked Congress for a declaration of war, which was passed almost unanimously. The United States was officially in World War II. With the American fleet temporarily neutralized, Japan immediately unleashed its southern operation, Their forces moved with lightning speed and shocking efficiency. They invaded Thailand, stormed down the Malay Peninsula, and captured the supposedly impregnable British fortress of Singapore. They overran the Philippines, forcing American and Filipino troops into a desperate defense on the Bataan Peninsula. They seized the oil-rich Dutch East Indies, modern-day Indonesia, and pushed into Burma, threatening British India. In just a few short months, Japan had conquered a vast empire, stretching from the borders of India to the Central Pacific. It seemed unstoppable. By mid-1942, the Empire of Japan was at its absolute zenith. They controlled an enormous territory, rich in the very resources they had gone to war for. But this rapid expansion created massive problems. Their supply lines were stretched dangerously thin across thousands of miles of ocean, making them vulnerable. Furthermore, their brutal occupation policies, under the guise of creating an Asia for the Asiatics, quickly turned the local populations against them, sparking resistance movements across Southeast Asia. They had won the battles, but they were already showing signs of losing the war for hearts and minds. Back in the United States, the shock of Pearl Harbor had transformed the nation. The sleeping giant, as Japanese Admiral Yamamoto had reportedly feared, was now fully awake and filled with a terrible resolve. America's immense industrial might was fully mobilized for war. Factories that once made cars were now churning out tanks, planes, and ships at an unprecedented rate. Millions of men and women joined the armed forces or went to work in war industries. This American entry completely changed the global calculus of the war. It solidified the grand alliance of the Allied powers. Now, it was the United States, with its colossal industrial base, the British Empire, with its global reach, and the Soviet Union, with its massive land army, united against the Axis powers. An anti-Axis declaration was signed by 26 nations, creating a coalition with overwhelming advantages in population, resources, and industrial capacity. The tide of the war had not yet turned, but the mechanism for that turn was now firmly in place. The attack on Pearl Harbor, intended to secure Japan's empire, had instead sealed its ultimate doom by drawing a determined and powerful United States into a global war to the finish. Thanks so much for watching. We'll explore the turning points of the Pacific War, from Midway to Guadalcanal, in our next video. If you found this interesting, please hit that like button, subscribe, and ring the bell so you don't miss it. See you next time.